All right, all right. Thank you for being prompt in your return. We are sticking to a very tight schedule. So I have with great privilege to introduce our next speaker. She is actually my boss. But she is also someone that I have long admired. She's been an inspiration to me. I feel very lucky to work with her. Please welcome Charlene Lee from Altimeter Group.
I was just saying to Brian, I'm a huge fan of his, so it's like a love fest in our offices. So I want to talk to you today about what disruptive technology is doing to the landscape of consumers. And just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, what are these technologies? Let's see how we get this to work. There we go. Facebook looms very large, 800 million people, and many other technologies that are out there. You've heard many of them mentioned today, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, it goes on and on and on and on. How many of you have been to every single one of these sites? Anybody? Been to every single one of them? Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir here because people have been to these. And do you go to them on a regular basis, like every day, every week? Probably not. And the reason I like thinking about this in a particular way is that the landscape is changing so quickly, it's very hard sometimes to get perspective. So I wanted to give you an idea of just how far we've come, how fast time flies. So here's a quick timeline. Back in 2007, that's when iPhone debuted, January 2007. That was almost 5 years ago. And before then, we were stuck with very different types of phones. After that, we saw Facebook platform, May of 2007, very transformational, when the site would actually open itself up to apps that other people would build, totally transformed the way we think about things. Facebook Connect came out a year after that, moving outside of just this one walled garden. Continuing on, App Store. Finally, Apple saw the vision and the ability to also open up. Before then, they had the ambition of making it completely closed. But then that summer, they opened up the App Store too as well. Continue on, debut of Android, January of 2010, very new technology. A little bit more, iPad came out April 2010. And then finally, timeline just recently, September 2011. The reason I put this all up there is to give you an idea of how compressed our world of disruptive technology has been. It's been a very short amount of time, a tremendous amount of change. Do you remember a time when we didn't have apps on our phones? It's hard to imagine that. And here we are today, just 4 years after that, short time, and the world has completely changed. The reason I say to this is that we have no idea what the new disruptive technologies will be. In fact, one of the key things that we have seen is that because of these technologies are coming along, they're constantly changing the way that we're thinking about things like sharing and the way that privacy has to do with that. Let me just give you one quick illustration of that. When caller ID first came out, people thought that that was a violation of privacy. And yet today, what do we do when somebody calls you and it says caller ID not known? Do you answer it? Absolutely not, right? Our notions of privacy switched 180 degrees in just a short amount of time. That took 8 years. Now, I have to be honest. How many of you, anybody here, ever say to themselves, I will never be on Facebook? Anybody want to raise their hands and admit that? OK, a couple people have. Are you on Facebook now? Those same people, they're saying, yeah, they are. So what happened there? We could never have imagined sharing the things that we do. But the value of that network, the value of that sharing changes our notions of what we actually do. Now, the reason I bring this up is that we have a new normal. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but you all know that this doesn't work anymore, the megaphone. Instead, what we have are conversations and not messages. And yet, what do we see oftentimes in social media coming from brands? We see messages replicated from existing campaigns and integrated together into social media. We know that human works, not corporate voices. And yet, oftentimes, what we see are corporate brands, not necessarily human aspects of that. And then we also know that this needs to be very continuous, that this is not something that is episodic, that goes up for 6 weeks on a flight and then comes back down again. And yet that's exactly the way we run our social media campaigns and promotions. So what has really changed? Have things really changed over the past couple of years? I want to give you an idea of what I think hasn't changed and yet has changed tremendously, and that is the focus on relationships instead of the technologies, because I believe that technologies will come and go, and as we've seen, it's constantly changing. We don't know what's going to happen next, but the relationships we have with our customers, with our employees, with the people we do business with, those are constantly evolving and also are constantly there that you have to think about and how they're changing. So I want to give you an idea of what are the things that are needed in order to maintain that relationship. These are two words that are constantly thrown around, authenticity and transparency. And yet we really don't know what those mean. We think we're being authentic, but unless you're being perceived as authentic, it's not going to work. So you're going out there saying all these things, you want an authentic relationship, but are you truly building one? And how transparent are you really being with your customers? Well, here's an example of a brand that was going and really trying to figure out how do you do this, because in the end, the biggest problem that brands have is that they feel very much out of control. And here's an example of a brand going out of control. This is a Dell laptop exploding back in 2006 in Osaka, Japan. This is not necessarily Dell's fault. It turned out it was the batteries. But this picture started making its way around the blogosphere because people had camera phones in Japan back then, and they took these and started posting them all around. They couldn't control that. And yet the only way they could get back into control was to go onto their brand new blog and start writing about this. And the way they wrote about it was very telling about the kind of relationship they wanted with people. How many of you would write something about this period if something like this happened to your brand? Well, this is what Dell wrote, and it's a now famous post. It's called simply Flaming Notebook, and it says, beyond what you've seen in the blogosphere, there was no update on the now infamous Flaming Notebook from Osaka. And they link to that picture. They link to that picture of their own product blowing up. Because they knew everybody was talking about this. There was no way for them to stop it. So rather than try to stop it or ignore it, try to sweep it under the carpet, they said, let's talk about this. Let's engage in a dialogue around this. And it's Lano Menchaca, the chief blogger from Dell, who was actually engaging people and answering their questions, going and talking to people in their customer service department and saying, let's engage. Because this is the only way we can get back in control. Because we realize that fundamentally, nobody is in control of their brands when it comes to what people see and say and do. Once we put it out there, there's no way for you to control it. There's only so much you can actually craft in the back rooms before your consumers and your customers get a hold of it. And then they can do anything they want. Now, when you think about this Flaming Notebook situation, we all have things that go wrong all the time. I want to see a show of hands. How many of you feel empowered today that your company could go out and have this kind of authentic, transparent conversation with your customers? I would love to see a show of hands. How many feel they could do it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So about 20 people here would feel comfortable with this. This was more than 5 years ago. This was in 2006. Since then, we've had Facebook explode, Twitter, YouTube, all those brands that you saw, all those channels and places that you can go. And yet, it's a small number of companies here in this room, the advanced people, the top people in the field, who feel that their companies are ready to engage in this kind of relationship. I point that out because I think what's really, truly changing and that people do not feel comfortable with is this new type of relationship you have to have. So the changing consumer landscape isn't about the technologies, but fundamentally, what kind of relationships are brands really, truly going to have with their customers? And I think right now, happening in the streets of today, we have something going on that's very, very fascinating to see just how far that consumer landscape has changed. So this is the Occupy Together movement. And this is a picture taken from the streets of Paris. Again, just last weekend. And how many of you have actually been down to see one of the Occupy events? Just a couple of hands here. I encourage you, if you get a chance, to go down to Zuccotti Square. That's right here on Occupy Wall Street. Go down and just see what it's like. See it firsthand. Because what's happening there is what I believe is this new mindset that these technologies have done. In the same way that our technologies, our senses of privacy and sharing have shifted 100 180 degrees because of cell phone technologies. It's also our sense of what we can do now as individuals because we feel so much empowered in the conversations we have with each other, and we are so listened to by each other. And yet, when it comes to our relationships that we have with brands, with government, so many things haven't been there. That authentic and transparent relationship just hasn't been there. So just a couple more pictures. This is one person, says PhD who can't pay rent is her message. Another one who says, I'm trying to be the change I want to see in the world. What are you doing? What are you doing? And then one other person who says, I'm lucky to be one of the 99% representing those who can't be here but believe. What are their messages back? So the Occupy movement has been faulted for having no coherence. It's being leaderless. It's a mess. I've been to the one in San Francisco and I found it to be a very angry, disassembled, not coherent, unpleasant experience. But the one here in New York, because it's been older, it's been more organized, been there for over a month, has started to have some semblance of conversations with things. And the conversations thing that came up most to me is that people want to be heard. And so the next one is the most telling for me, this question, have you seen these people? And they're people with the logo of McDonald's, AT&T, and Exxon, and the person says, I haven't. So who's really present and who's not in these conversations? I think the question, because you are all from businesses, is when Occupy Together, whatever the name of that movement, comes into your lobby, as it did with Citibank, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? What will you sit down and listen to what people are saying? Well, today in social media, what we have is many, many tools. We have tons of tools to allow us to listen. And here's AT&T doing a really pretty good job of using Twitter to respond to people, listen to what they're saying. Again, one of the people that placard guy said, I haven't seen these folks. Well, where are they? Well, AT&T is right here. They're listening. They're on Twitter. They're on YouTube. They're in all the social media. But do people really feel like they're being heard? And they actually have a great place, AT&T Customer Care. When people reach out to at AT&T Customer Care, there's somebody there to respond back to them, doing a very good job, exercising a lot of best practices. But I believe that's not going to be enough anymore. It's not enough just to be there responding. It's can you actually go out there and proactively and say, I'm not just here to be a business. I'm really trying to understand what are your needs. I'm going to listen, really, truly listen. And more importantly, learn what you are missing. Really, truly understand and learn what is it that you want to have. And more importantly, the customer can't just be listened to. They have to feel like they are known. How many feel like you're known, truly known, and have that kind of relationship with the companies you do business with? It's very, very rare when that happens. And I think that's the true opportunity that lies before us. So again, if there's one thing I want you to take away from this conversation, that it is about the relationships. It's not about technologies. It's not about the best tweet that you can put out there or the best channel to be in. Just put it all aside and think about what are the relationships you can truly have with people because these technologies allow you to be right there, standing right next to them. A couple tips on how to get prepared, and hopefully we have a few minutes for questions. I believe the first and most important thing inside your company you have to do is to create a culture of sharing. Fundamentally, how do you share as an organization? Businesses are horrible at sharing. We have very flabby sharing muscles. We don't do that as a course of the work that we do. In fact, we're told to do just the opposite. Don't share. Keep secrets. Keep the decision-making limited. The second thing is you've got to be very disciplined now about the way you use social technologies, these new mobile technologies. Here's an example from the US Air Force. When they get a message from the social world, they assess it. They say, is it positive? If it's positive, then they follow a certain triage route. If it's negative, they follow a totally different place that they go through. And they go and figure out who else in the organization needs to hear from them. And they make sure they understand what that triage path is going to look like. It is not ad hoc. It is something that they have thought through because that relationship with the customer is important. And as long as it remains ad hoc and not organized, it remains in one person's mind. If that person goes on vacation, or even worse, that person leaves the company, then that relationship walks out with them. And how dare you treat your customers like that? So if your relationships are important in social media, Are you putting the discipline in place to make sure that they get the care that they need? One thing that my colleague Jeremiah Aoyang has done is write this great report about readiness in social media. Do you have the foundations and the platforms to be able to execute on all those plans, on all those relationships? At the very bottom, what are the foundations you're laying, the objectives, the policies, the guidelines? Then think about safety and onwards. The problem is we may want to be at the very top of that pyramid, but until you've built that foundation, the whole thing will collapse. The other thing to think about is prioritizing the disruptions that happen and that matter. Very quickly, the 3 frameworks that I tend to look at all these new disruptive technologies is, first of all, does it change the user experience? Because if it changes the way customers interact with each other, connect with each other, then you need to pay attention to it. Does it impact your business model, the way you make money or the way that you can save costs? Because then you as an organization need to deal with it. And the third most disruptive type of technology that's disruptive are ones that impact the ecosystem, the way that value is shared within that network of value. If that's fundamentally changing, then you've got bigger issues and problems, and you may have to fundamentally rethink the kind of business you're in. You can't address every single technology disruption that comes along, so which are the ones that you are going to prioritize? And then what you prioritize versus somebody else is going to be very different depending on that relationship. My fourth and last point is this, in that in this world, relationships are never perfect. And yet in business, we strive for perfection. We can't tolerate a single failure. A single failure is deemed to be just earth-shattering. We can't deal with that. And yet, relationships are never perfect. So how do you apologize? How do you say sorry? How do you admit you're wrong in the way that Dell has the confidence to be able to do that and therefore gain the trust of their customers? Google's mantra has been very strong. The reason why I think they have been so strong and so successful is they have this mantra of fail fast and fail smart. How often do you encourage people to push the limits and push that opportunity and create opportunities for people to fail inside your organization? One way to help you think about that is to create what I call sandbox covenants. You define what are the failures that you can deal with, and you set it up so that people can actually play inside of that sandbox, define the walls of that sandbox, and make sure that people have lots of opportunities to experiment, to fail, take those risks. But just as importantly, you define what isn't allowed out of those walls. What happens, what are the circumstances and the consequences of what happens if you step outside of those walls. And so just to summarize again, we can chant it all together, it's about relationships. It's not about the technologies. The technologies enable new types of relationships to be formed, deeper ones, if you have the courage to go out there and embrace them. So this is my contact information. I'm happy to send you the slides. You can just send an email to slides@altimetergroup.com. And we have a little bit of time for questions. Any questions? Right here. Stand up and say.
Yeah, so
there's a mic right there.
Love your presentation. Love hearing you talk. Curious, I think the real issue is leadership vision in the ability to execute on what you've so eloquently articulated. Where do you start? I mean, I think the reason 20 people raise their hand and say we could do that is not that they wouldn't do it themselves. It's that the leader of the company, the marketing director, the whomever, doesn't get it. So where do you start? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with executives. And first of all, they don't see this as relationships. They see it as technologies. And they frankly don't think it's something they have to pay attention to. But believe me, I do believe that a very short amount of time will pass before Occupy, fill in the company name, happens. I think that's going to happen within the next month, couple of weeks, where your employees will all show up. And so is that the time when you will actually say, well, gee, maybe we should do something about this? Or do you pre-plan ahead and say, fundamentally, something has changed and shifted here? For them to understand that this is about relationships is the key thing. If you say to them, I know you don't get the technologies, you never have to go on Twitter, but explain to me, what does that relationship look like for that with the customers? What does it truly look like? And I do believe it's an issue around leadership, that most companies have no idea what that relationship looks like beyond a transaction. Well, what do I want from customers? I want to buy more stuff. Well, is there anything beyond that? And we as customers now have a choice. We will gravitate towards brands that will know, yeah, it's more than just buying stuff, but what is it? Do you take the time to say that? And this is the test. If you ask the CEO, your marketing director, you have a customer standing right next to you. What do you say to them when they ask you these tough questions? What do you say to them? And then you better, if you have the courage to say to them standing next to you, knowing that they're going to probably turn around and blog about that, why don't you say that directly to all the people using these tools? So I go back to, it's about sharing. What will you share? What are you willing to share about? When will you share? Who will you share it with? Work those muscles, because if those executives don't know how to share, period, with anybody even close to them, there's no way they're going to share with people externally. Hope that helps. You, and then we'll do those two quick. Yeah, go ahead.
I hear a lot about relationships between brands and consumers, but as a consumer, the idea of having a relationship with every product that I purchase just seems overwhelming. I mean, like, the amount of products that I really care that much about probably are a dozen or so that I'm committed to. So how do you work that out?
And I don't think you have, in the same way, I don't have relationships with 4,000 friends on Facebook. I really don't. I have a deep relationship with a couple of them. In the same way, I think you only have the capacity to have deep relationships with a few brands. Will you be one of them? You know, I actually have a deep relationship with certain consumer products, soaps, cleaning things. I am so loyal to them, and I love them. And I love them because my kids will do the dishes with them. So what does that relationship look like? It doesn't always have to be deep, but what will it look like? Okay. Last question here.
On Twitter and Facebook, what do you find really exciting in the world of social today? You finding new platforms? I hear of a new platform called Empire Avenue, where you can buy shares of people and things. What do you find exciting?
So this is the coded way of saying, what's the next big thing, right? Since you have me on stage, what's the next big thing? I don't know. My answer to that is I don't know what the next big thing is. If I did, I wouldn't be standing here, right? I'd be working on that. Empire Avenue, really cool, very interesting. I bet that most people here have tried it and haven't gone back to it. You know, really cool game dynamics behind it. I don't worry about what the next big thing is, because when it becomes big and I see my consumers using it, that's when I start paying attention to it. What's good for you and what's good for somebody else is going to be very different. In some cases, I look at gamification as being very important for some companies, but not from badging perspectives. It's about putting gaming into enterprise apps like Salesforce, so they will use their CRM system. So I can put leaderboards. I mean, the whole idea of making work fun would be awesome, right? If I have to spend time in that thing, at least give me a badge for it. So I kind of go, what are the important things inside your business? And that disruptive technology or gamification may not make a whit of difference to your customers, but could be incredibly effective in your business model in terms of taking your costs down. So it's about applying these technologies back into your business, your core business, of what really will move the needle. And that means, again, having at the core and the center, what is that goal? What is that relationship that you're building towards with your customers? And by extension to your employees. Okay, thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.